Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today in the garage, I'm introducing a build that I was actually going to keep secret from you guys. But then I started thinking, this one might be too good to keep to myself. Alright, so let's get down to brass tacks. If you know me even a little bit, you know I'm a huge fan of scooters. And if you know me very well, you'll know that my favorite scooters of all time are vintage Yamaha scooters. In fact, the first scooter I ever really fell in love with was my Yamaha CV80K Riva. That was the first scooter I ever really built for myself and intended to keep forever. But back to this scooter. This gem showed up on the Facebook marketplace and the price I could not say no to. It was free, and a free scooter is usually worth picking up, but a free scooter of my favorite variety, I couldn't say no. So without further ado, here is my 1983 Yamaha Riva 180. Now, as you can probably tell, the modifications have already started. I've done a headset delete and a few other things. But I am really excited about this build, and let me tell you why. Now, one of my favorite features of scooters of this era is the use of a single-sided front fork. Okay, so it's much like the earlier Vespa models where the front wheel can come off completely from the other side. And it uses just a traditional style shock absorber. This shock absorber might have been used also on a Yamaha motorcycle as a rear shock. Now, while that does lend itself to some interesting ride geometry and different characteristics for handling, what's really cool is this whole shock can be pulled out and replaced with air suspension. There is no gutting of a telescoping fork or plumbing lines or anything. It's pretty much plug and play. And much like the front suspension, the rear suspension is also single-sided. And my plan for this scooter is to take an air suspension kit designed to be used as the rear suspension of a much bigger bike and take one shock, install it on the rear of this scooter, and the other shock, install it on the front of this scooter. And that will give this scooter the ability to lay frame. Now, I'm a big Lowrider guy, and I'm also a big scooter guy, so I think this is going to be the perfect fusion of the two worlds for me. Now, as you can see, the modifications kind of got ahead of the camera work, but here's what it looked like when I picked it up. Whoa! So as you can see, I've already deleted the headset because I'm kind of going for that Fuji Rabbit look. If you're not familiar with the Fuji Rabbit, it's one of the most iconic Japanese scooters of the 60s, and it kind of is a benchmark for scooter style. In addition to that, I've picked up a new seat cover because this seat's pretty destroyed. And I've also purchased replacement panels for this side cowl and this front engine cover. So you might be wondering, why was this scooter literally being given away? And there's a couple reasons for that. The first is, these scooters have an extremely complex carburetor. There's a lot of different vacuum diaphragms for different choke circuits and different running and starting procedures. Yamaha was really experimenting with complex systems to give their scooters better drivability and easier starting. And the Riva 180 is sort of the pinnacle of that. You can see here in the engine compartment, there's a slew of vacuum lines and different switches. And a lot of people delete the thermal controlled vacuum solenoids that are supposed to operate all these different circuits. And they install these little, twist lock vacuum stoppers, which this previous owner had done. Now, another issue driving this scooter's price point so low it was free was the rear wheel was locked up. Now, as soon as I got home, I whipped the wheel off and found that the brake shoes had come apart and the linings had actually come off the shoes and were jamming themselves. And a little bit of that and flushing out the final drive with some automatic transmission fluid just to get some years of gunk out of it, freed up the rear tire. So I'm hoping that's going to be good and I won't have to replace those units, but we'll find out when we get there. So what are my plans for the build? Well, the first thing I want to do is replace this old complicated carburetor with a more simple carburetor, maybe a Kian CVK or a Mikuni slide pull style carburetor. The next thing I want to do is change the lighting out. Now, the old headlight was mounted to the headset, and I think that's really ugly and very un-Fuji. But I'd like to get maybe a Model A style or some other bullet style headlight and mount it right here to the front fairing. I'd then like to give the Scoot a very loud paint job, and the icing on the cake will be lay-in frame with air suspension. All right, so my first task tonight is going to be to remove this old carburetor and all these vacuum switches and everything, and test fit a few different carburetor options. Now, a good friend of mine gave me this Mikuni 24mm slide pull carburetor, and it's one of the round slides off of an old dirt bike or something. And I think it will really, really clean up this engine compartment, and it'll simplify the engine system. Now, another option I have is, of course, going with the Kian CVK, which is the typical carburetor on most scooters. That scooter features an automatic choke. This one has a pull choke. So let's see if I can fit this into that. All right, first thing first, some of these home repairs. All right, that's it. Air box is out. So let's take a look at what's going on in here. The air box left a pretty good cavity, and there's quite a bit of leaves and, you know, critters living in here, but I think there is some room for a new carburetor. Starter relay back up here by the coil. Intake manifold, if I can find an intake. Oh, there she goes. She broke loose. Here it comes. All right. Carburetor's out. Let's take this throttle cable off. Okay, we won't need this throttle cable where we're going. What else is on here? Some vacuum lines. I guess I'm gonna have to pull this battery box out. I'm gonna take this part off too, I guess. All right, battery box is out. All right, and then, oh yeah, of course, and then we got a bowl heater. You know, so a lot of these things, you have to think they must have been emissions related, you know. They're really trying to make a clean running bike that would pass whatever regulations were around the corner at the time. Just a few more lines to cut. All right, and we're home free. Now, as you can see, there's a lot of different little passages and orifices and vacuum controls for some sort of bowl heater and a this and a that. All kinds of stuff on this. And like I said, while that's really neat, it really makes this thing a lot less reliable in old age. I'm gonna throw this up on eBay because it's good to somebody somewhere, just not to me. Now check out these carburetors side by side. I mean, the differences are dramatic. Even though they're about the same size when it comes to flow and application. This is a 24mm Mikuni, and I'm not sure what the size on this Mikuni is. It's kind of got a really interesting elliptical shaped mouth on it. This dimension is a lot wider than this dimension. But I expect that they probably flow about the same amount of fuel. This has some sort of accelerator pump that's maybe vacuum assisted or something. You see when you actuate the throttle here, there's that little plunger that kind of goes down. And it's a CV carburetor, of course. So, you know, the throttle doesn't actually move the main slide up and down. The throttle actually just allows the butterfly to open here, which allows more air to pass through the carburetor, which then the velocity of the air moves the CV slide up and down. This is just basic. Man, this is like one step above lawnmower. There's your throttle cable goes down, picks up the main slide, Bob's your uncle. Carburetor. I really dig this. Now let's see if this 24 mil is going to drop right in there. Oh, maybe. How nice is that, huh? It looks great in there. The choke can even operate at this point, which is pretty slick. Man, already a great success. So I'll probably run my throttle cable up around here and then back down to the throttle that way. I guess the next thing to look at is the gas tank and see what kind of shape that's in. All right, so this gas tank has a heavy smell of varnished gasoline. It smells like it might have been in there for several years. Let's see what we got here. Oh, she's stuck fast. Man, I hate to do this, but I'm gonna have to put some channel locks on it. There it goes. Nice and easy. Oh man, I'm gonna need a different fuel tank. Well, you can definitely see just by the chain alone. I mean, this thing is like just absolutely barnacled. It looks like it was on the bottom of the ocean. I mean, it's a horrible color. It's like red and crusted. And there are a lot of fuel tank treatments out there. There's like cream and a couple other ones. Typically, once it's gone this far and it's scaled like that, you really can't go back. You end up with just really, really fine rust particles clogging your carburetor at all time. You know, usually the seller will say, well, it was running when it was parked. Well, if it was running and everything was great, why did you park it? Like there was another problem, and that's why it sat for so long. So don't just think that people just take a perfectly good scooter and put it in their garage and then it just rots and then it just needs to be cleaned up and it'll be perfectly good again. That's kind of unreasonable thinking. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. It does happen, but just more than often, it's got some other issue, like the battery keeps going dead, or the motor's down on power, and then they park it and leave it. So look out for that when you're getting free stuff or cheap stuff. Okay, so we got a vacuum line on the other side. So I'll just cut that too. Whoa, yeah, that was so brittle. Fuel tank, she's out. Get the seat off because that's going to be recovered. And I don't think I'm going to do that myself because I just don't have the upholstery skills necessary to do a real nice job. So I'm going to need to take that to an upholsterer. They're going to need to rebuild all this foam. All this foam is just like flaking off. There it goes. What do we have here? This is some sort of, looks like a vacuum pump actually. I'm going to pull the service manual out later and see what all this stuff used to do. Man, there's a big old spider in there. And I kind of just want to see what I am deleting. This definitely was some sort of breather, or in here there's probably a diaphragm. See, you can see that vacuum line goes in here, and this looks like a fresh air breather. So maybe this was like a tank vent. Who knows? Who even knows what this was supposed to be? All right, and over on this side, we've got stator wiring, and that's important. I'm not sure what this goes to. Maybe that's the pickup coil. But these here, this already was disconnected, who knows? And then we have this little vacuum switch. This is an Electro vacuum switch. You can see there used to be some vacuum line plugged in here. And then there's this one that goes out the back, but it was important. But now it's not. So, away you go. Man, it's looking better and better, isn't it? Let me get this nonsense fuel filter. There we go. That's looking good. Let's see, we've got some wires that have been deleted, I guess, by the previous owner. To look up what those did. I believe this was the fuel sender here. Let me start marking some of these things. And I don't think I'll label these ones because I think I probably will just delete them. But only after a deep dive into my wiring schematic. Generally, I kind of just want to clean this motor up a little bit. Maybe take it to a car wash and blast it off and all that good stuff, and kind of come up with some solutions. So I think the next thing I need to do is actually just pull this motor out of the chassis. Oh, the brake cable, of course. Man, got ahead of myself there. All right, now it should be ready to come out. Oh yeah, she's heavy. And what I really like about working on scooters is the engine typically comes with its own engine stand. How nice is that? This thing is absolutely beautiful. The way that Yamaha built their scooter engines in the 80s was just exceptional. I mean, if you look at like the design of all the cases, everything has little cooling fins built into it. I mean, it's got an oil filter. It's just the next level. And that's what I really, really love about these scooters. They weren't just scooters like, oh, this is just the cheapest motorcycle, or oh, this is the cheapest transportation. This was as legitimate as any motorcycle that Yamaha built. It was just an automatic motorcycle with 10-inch wheels. All right, so the first thing is this shield here has two strange hoses coming out of it. They're labeled 2 and 3, which I appreciate the labeling. I don't know what they're talking about. But I want to pull that off and see what kind of mechanism is under there. Oh man, just check this out. There's a little Yamaha tuning fork right here on the intake manifold. I mean, class, man, class. Okay, important thing to talk about when you're working on old motorcycles, and especially old Japanese motorcycles, they did not use Phillips screws. They used JIS, Japanese Industry Standard. It's got a different profile than your traditional Phillips profile. And you can put a Phillips in there and it'll generally work, but when they're really tight, you'll strip them out. So you need to use a high quality screwdriver, and it needs to be JIS. That's just for you guys working on your own stuff. Sometimes they do need a little persuasion. If it's really stuck in there, I'll use an impact driver. But typically just a few taps on it breaks them free. Oh yeah, that's a complicated thing down there. I'm not certain what it does. But it looks like I'm going to have to pull the intake manifold off too. What is this? I mean, look at this. This is an oil level sender, right? How many scooters do you know have an oil level sender? That's just, man. There it is. You know what? I think hose is off. That was loose. That was also loose. All right, and it's off. I'm gonna have to look this up in the service manual and see what it does. It looks like it's another diaphragm cap here. So some sort of vacuum switching, I don't know. But whatever it is, it ain't going back on there. Beautiful. Now, I didn't even try and start this motor. I never start a motor in question because you just don't know. If there's a valve that was in the open position when the vehicle was shut off. It can be frozen in the open position. When you hit the starter button, you know, the piston comes up, whacks the valve, Bob's your uncle, you lost your motor. So I'm going to take this fan shroud off and put a wrench on the crank here and see if I can turn the motor over by hand. So what we got in here? Oh yeah. You know, there's like a few years worth of leaves and sticks in there. Let me pull the spark plug out so we don't have any compression. And the spark plug has cobwebs on it, which is not a good sign. That means that the exhaust valve might have been open when this thing was stored. See if the motor spins. All right, so the last thing I want to check out before I start cleaning this whole motor up is I want to check out this belt drive, because while Yamaha was really trying to push the envelope for technology in these scooters, they developed a pretty interesting transmission system. Now it's got the traditional style transmission with the variator drive clutch to the passive driven clutch, and that's geared to the rear tire. But it actually has a multi-plate clutch inside of there too. And that's to just kind of like, it's just to make a smoother engagement of the transmission. You know, this is a pretty big and powerful motor. It's a 180cc motor. So that clutch kind of allowed a smoother engagement, like from zero throttle to getting on the throttle. But I want to check that out, make sure that, we haven't destroyed anything, make sure that everything is there, and if I need to buy a new belt or I need to buy a new variator or what I need to do, I'll have the knowledge. So, without further ado, okay, so I'm back from the car wash. This thing really did clean up pretty well. There's still some grime that's really just caked on there that, just from years of use. But I'll fine tune that when I'm ready. I really want to make sure this motor runs before I spend a whole bunch of time cleaning and painting everything. Like we found out before, it spins pretty nice and easy, which I'm pretty excited about. I'm actually going to leave the sensor wiring off, because this is just for one of the thermal switches in the carburetor, and I'm not going to need that. I cleaned up the fan shroud just a little bit with just a little bit of 6-in-1 and a rag, but it looks like the plastic is starting to deteriorate. When I'm ready to do the final assembly, I might go and replace all these JIS screws with hex head screws. I'm going to go ahead and throw the exhaust on it real quick. Stick that in the hole just to hold it for now, while I go and find whatever bolt was stuck in there. This bike had been apart quite a few times before I got it. I could tell because there were a lot of inappropriate fasteners. If you know Japanese motorcycles and scooters, they don't use 13mm heads. It's a 12 or a 14, and this thing had a lot of 13mm bolts, and you could just tell when you're looking at it, it didn't look exactly right. I think this was the bolt they had holding the exhaust on. So, in order to keep the size of the engine down, right? They actually went with the push rod design instead of an overhead cam. And if you look at the cylinder head, you can tell like this exhaust port is like really close, right on the top of the head. If this was overhead cam, this would have to be a little bit bigger, and there would have to be followers and cam, and it would have kind of made the engine larger. This engine is actually a little bit smaller than a GY6 150. But it has a larger displacement. So I just think that's really cool. I love push rods. I'm a big Harley guy. I got my Harley Owners Group patch here. But yeah, push rods are cool and this motor is cool. Okay, cool. So let me put the, oh man. Put the exhaust on before putting the rear wheel back on. Rookie mistake, man. Rookie mistake. I guess all there is to do now is marry the engine back to the chassis. Oh yeah, I know. Seriously, it's stuck in my pocket. Okay. I'm gonna take that shock off real quick. Alright, that'll just make things a little smoother. All right, and just like that, the engine's back in the chassis, and I'm really stoked on the progress we made today. It's kind of funny to take everything out and then put everything back and call it progress, but I really feel like we discovered a lot of stuff, we sorted a lot of stuff, and got some good cleaning in here. I honestly have to say I couldn't be happier with this carburetor in here. This Mikuni, I believe it's a VM24. It looks great in here. It fits right in. Looks like I'm gonna have clearance for a little pod filter, or maybe a little velocity stack or something cool like that. All the wiring really cleaned up nicely. The motor cleaned up nicely. I'm glad that it turns over. We definitely cleaned up all those vacuum lines. That choke slides in and out easy enough. I might have to put a choke cable on there or make some sort of clever little doodad for it. But all in all, it couldn't be a better fit. And I'm really stoked with the cleanliness of this engine compartment now. But I think in the next video, I'm gonna try and get this motor running. So make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because you're not gonna wanna miss any updates from Project SLAMAHA here. So until next time, keep it shiny side up.